Hello and welcome to my review of Revolt in 2100 by Robert Heinlein. First published in 1964, this is a collection of 3 of Heinlein's shorts from the Future History series that in turn dated back to the late 30s. The longest story is If This Goes On, a 1953 reworking of a story that appeared in Astounding Science Fiction in 1940. This story is considered one of the best in the Future History series and won the Retro Hugo for 1941 at the 2016 Worldcon. If This Goes On takes up 140 of the book's 190 pages. It follows John Lyle, a devout soldier in a theocratic USA. Lyle is serving in the Prophet's elite guard when he meets and falls in love with one of the Vestal Virgins. Their love is against the rules, so they're spirited out of the military compound and join the resistance. A significant amount of the story is devoted to the organisation and running of the resistance, and it feels a little like a prototype for the later novel The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, particularly the descriptions of the resistance hierarchy and the computer that calculates their odds of success. If you look at this picture, you can begin to see one of the issues I have with Heinlein. His early work was lean and mean. His later work was bloated and full of largely uninteresting sermonizing. There are sections where this story moves quite briskly, but there are other parts where nothing much is happening, and it makes me wonder if perhaps the shorter version that appeared in Astounding might not be the better one. Another concept the novel indulges, which we will see again and again in Heinlein's work, notably Starship Troopers and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, is that the protagonist is absent, or at least merely an observer of the final action. It's a strange thing to indulge so often, ultimately serving to do little more than make the hero of the novel seem rather irrelevant. Additionally, the impassioned love at first sight that was a catalyst for the novel barely survives the first act. Judith is taken by the resistance to freedom in Mexico, and beyond the literal Dear John letter she sends Lyle is never heard from again. Lyle, who stays in America to serve with the resistance, in a thrilling depiction of a battlefield administrator's administrative assistant role, doesn't seem to miss her very much, and then embarks on a relationship with one of her fellow Vestals. This again feels like a precursor to the more overt anti-monogamy messages that would dominate Heinlein's later work from Stranger in a Strange Land onwards. While Freemasons might enjoy the role that they play in resisting the theocratic dictator, I wouldn't like to comment on how accurate the depiction is. Overall though, If This Goes On is one of the more solid efforts from Heinlein. The second story, Coventry, takes place a few years later and would potentially have made a much better candidate for the revision and extension that If This Goes On received. Coventry follows David McKinnon, who, after punching a stranger, is banished from the US. Initially he is excited to be part of a new, freer, anarchistic society, but his naivety is soon exploited and he loses all of his possessions and finds himself sentenced to work off a trumped-up debt in a labour camp. He is rescued from this predicament by the underground and eventually decides to do the right thing and return to the USA and warn them of an impending attack from the exiled anarchists and the remains of the old theocracy. The story and its world-building is helped by the shorter format, which forces Heinlein to concentrate on plot and character rather than indulging his pedagogic tendencies. It's worth considering his fairly predictable outcome probably wouldn't have been anything like as familiar in the 1940s as it is today, and allowing for that, Coventry is one of those smart, well-paced and likeable stories that Heinlein built a reputation on. Sadly, the third story, Misfit, is simply awful. It follows a group of space marines, and particularly one called Libby, who leave Earth to turn an asteroid into a space station and refueling depot for ships travelling between Earth and Mars. Libby is initially serving as a grunt, but has a talent for maths that soon makes him indispensable. The problems with the story, and listing them all would probably end up being longer than the 10 or so pages it runs to, are head-scratchingly bewildering. Why are space marines doing what amounts to building work to begin with? Aren't there normal astronauts who can build space stations in the future? If not, then why are there space marines but not space builders? Are there so many space marines and so few demands on their time that they can afford to tie them up for months on end in a building project? In which case, why are there so many space marines if there's simply no need for them? The second thing Heinlein used in these early stories to build his reputation was an interest in the science. Here that takes the form of a huge dump of data about the spacesuits that the Marines will be using. The problem is that the long training lecture is given to the Marines a few hours before they are due to use them. Clearly in the months spent travelling they could have done this, or far more likely on Earth before they even set out. It would be rather devastating to find out that one or more of the company were claustrophobic or something and simply could not get on with the suit. What a time to find that out. This nonsense clearly shows that the lecture was not intended for Heinlein's characters but for his readers. As such, it breaks immersion as much as it bores. Ultimately, Revolt in 2100 is worth it only for Heinlein completists, or if you're a newbie looking to get your feet wet in his future history series. If you're completely new to Heinlein, I'd recommend The Puppet Masters before this. Thank you for listening to my review of Revolt in 2100 by Robert A. Heinlein. If you made it this far, why not try some of the options for subscribing, campanology, liking or not, and commenting? Why not check out some of my other videos while you're here as well?